My mom called and told me I had 48 hours to get out of my inherited house because it now belonged to my sister. I stayed quiet and gathered legal documents. When they showed up, the police were waiting for them. I thought I had my life together. As a successful attorney in Boston, I never expected to receive that devastating phone call from my mother. Her words still ring in my ears. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. That house is your sister's now. The house my grandmother left specifically to me in her will." I felt my world crashing down. But instead of arguing, I stayed silent. They had no idea what was coming. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you need to know about the house and my relationship with my grandmother. The house sits on a quiet street in the suburbs of Boston with its wraparound porch and blue shutters that my grandmother Elaine and I painted together when I was 12. Built in 1920, it has the original hardwood floors, a grand staircase that I used to slide down as a child, and a kitchen with a bay window overlooking a garden that blooms with peonies every spring. But more than its physical beauty, that house represents the only true home I ever knew. While my parents were busy climbing corporate ladders, my grandmother raised me. Every summer and most weekends were spent in that house, where the smell of her apple pie would fill the kitchen and the sound of her laughter would echo through the halls. "A woman must know how to take care of herself," Grandma Elaine would say, as she taught me how to fix a leaky faucet. I remember her hands, weathered but strong, guiding mine as she showed me how to use tools that most girls my age never touched. By the time I was 15, I could change a tire patch drywall and cook a full Thanksgiving dinner from scratch. The garden was her sanctuary and she made it ours. We would spend hours tending to the vegetables and flowers, my knees in the dirt next to hers, as she explained the difference between annuals and perennials. Life comes back share. If you give it the right conditions to thrive, she would say, her gardening wisdom doubling as life lessons that shaped who I am today. When I was accepted to law school, she converted the sunroom into a study space for me. I prepared for the bar exam, surrounded by her plants, drawing strength from her presence, even during the most stressful moments of my education. She believed in me when no one else did, saw potential in me that my own parents overlooked. My parents, Nancy and Harold, were different. Success to them was measured in promotions and possessions. My mother, with her perfectly styled hair and country club memberships, had mapped out my life before I could walk. My father, distant and critical, seemed to view parenting as another business transaction where results were all that mattered. Their disappointment when I chose public service law instead of corporate was palpable. "All that education wasted," my mother had said. Then there was my sister Stephanie, 4 years younger and infinitely more willing to follow the path our parents laid out. She went to the business school they chose, married the man they approved of, and never questioned their authority. While I fought for independence, she leaned into their control, becoming the daughter they always wanted. When Grandma Elaine passed away 3 years ago, her will was clear. The house was mine. I remember sitting in the attorney's office as the will was read, feeling both grief and gratitude wash over me. My grandmother knew what that house meant to me. She knew I was the one who helped her maintain it in her final years, when arthritis made it difficult for her to climb the stairs. My parents were visibly displeased with the arrangement, but the will was ironclad. My grandmother had consulted with her attorney, made sure every document was properly executed, and left no room for misinterpretation. The house was mine, along with a letter that I keep in my desk drawer to this day, where she wrote, "This house has sheltered 4 generations of strong women. Now it will shelter you, my dear Cher, as you continue to forge your own path." Despite owning the house, I maintained my apartment closer to downtown Boston, where my office is located. The commute from the suburbs would have been brutal, and my caseload as a public interest attorney demanded long hours. Still, I visited regularly, maintained the property, paid the taxes, and kept it exactly as my grandmother would have wanted. I had plans to eventually move in, perhaps when I started a family of my own, or when my career allowed for more flexibility. Never once did I consider selling it, despite offers from developers who saw the property as prime real estate. The house wasn't just a building to me. It was the physical manifestation of the only unconditional love I had ever known. It was home in the truest sense of the word. My parents never understood this attachment. "It's just a house," my mother would say whenever I mentioned a renovation project or a garden update. "You could sell it and buy something more practical." To them, everything had a price tag, a market value. The idea that something could be priceless because of memories and emotion was foreign to their pragmatic worldview. I worked my way through college and law school, taking out loans and working part-time jobs, while my sister had her education fully funded by our parents. When I graduated with honors, they attended the ceremony but left early for a business dinner. When I won my first major case providing housing rights for a group of elderly tenants facing eviction, my father called it small time compared to corporate mergers my sister helped facilitate in her finance job. The divide between us grew over the years, with holiday gatherings becoming exercises in restraint as I bit my tongue through thinly veiled criticisms and comparisons. Still, I maintained contact because that's what family does, or so I thought. I never imagined they would go this far. I never believed they would try to take the one thing that mattered most to me. But as I would soon discover, there are depths to family betrayal that I had yet to fathom. It was a Friday evening when my phone rang. I had just returned home from court, exhausted after a week of fighting for a family facing foreclosure. The sight of my mother's name on the caller ID nearly made me send it to voicemail, but some sense of obligation made me answer. Sure, we need to discuss the house, my mother began without even a greeting. Her voice had that clipped business-like tone she used when decisions had already been made, and my input was merely a formality. What about it, I asked, kicking off my heels and settling onto my couch, unaware that my world was about to shift on its axis. Your sister needs a place to live. As you know, her divorce was finalized last month and she can't afford to stay in their house. Your father and I have decided that she and Amanda will move into your grandmother's house. I sat up straight, my exhaustion instantly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. What do you mean you've decided? That house belongs to me. Grandma left it to me in her will. Don't be difficult, Cher, my mother snapped. You don't even live there. It's sitting empty while your sister and your niece have nowhere to go. Family helps family. I'm not being difficult, Mom. I'm stating a fact. The house is legally mine. I pay the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance. I can't just give it away. We aren't asking you to give it away, she countered, her voice rising. We're telling you that the family needs to redistribute assets based on current needs. Stephanie has a child to consider. What do you have? A career that keeps you too busy to even use the house. The implication that my life was somehow less valuable because I didn't have children cut deep, but it was nothing new for my mother. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Has Stephanie even looked for apartments? Has she considered downsizing? There are options besides taking my house. Your father's already spoken with Martin, she said, referring to our family attorney. There are provisions in your grandmother's will that we can challenge provisions about the property being used as a primary residence, which you're not doing. This was a lie. I knew the will inside and out, had read it multiple times, and there were no such provisions. My grandmother had left the house to me unconditionally. Mom, that's not true. The will is clear. The house is mine without conditions. Don't tell me what is and isn't true, Cher. Her voice had reached the shrill pitch that signaled the end of any rational discussion. You've always been selfish, always thinking about yourself instead of the family. Your sister needs this house for her and Amanda. You have 48 hours to get any personal items you want out of there. After that, Stephanie is moving in. Before I could respond, I heard my father's voice in the background. He must have been listening on another extension. Sure, this isn't up for debate. The decision has been made. Stephanie needs the house more than you do. This is about doing what's right for the family. But Dad, this isn't legal. You can't just decide to give away my property. We can, and we have, he replied coldly. Martin is drawing up the papers now. If you fight this, you'll only be hurting your sister and your niece. Is that really what you want, to deprive a child of a stable home because you're clinging to sentiment? The manipulation was so transparent yet still effective at making me momentarily question myself. Was I being selfish? No, I realized. This wasn't about selfishness. This was about justice, about respecting my grandmother's wishes, about standing up for myself in a family that had always diminished me. I need to speak with Martin directly, I said, trying to buy time. He's away for the weekend, my father replied too quickly. The papers will be ready on Monday, but Stephanie needs to move in sooner. Your mother already told you 48 hours, Cher. Be reasonable for once in your life. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Within minutes, it buzzed with a text from Stephanie. I know this is hard for you, but I really need this right now. Amanda and I have nowhere else to go. Mom and Dad said you never use the house anyway. I promise I'll take good care of it. I'll help you move your stuff this weekend if you want. The false sympathy, coupled with the presumption that this was a done deal, made my blood boil. I tried calling Martin, our family attorney, but as my father had said, his office was closed for the weekend. I called his cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. Either he was truly unavailable or had been instructed not to speak with me. I sat in my apartment surrounded by case files and legal briefs, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The betrayal cut deep, not just because they were trying to take my house, but because of how easily they dismissed me, how readily they prioritized Stephanie over me. Yet again, as the shock began to wear off, something else took its place: determination. I was a lawyer, for God's sake. I specialized in housing rights. If anyone should know how to protect their property, it was me. And in that moment, I decided that I would not go quietly. I would not hand over my grandmother's legacy without a fight. The clock was ticking 48 hours, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. As a lawyer who specialized in housing rights, I knew exactly what my family was attempting to do was completely illegal. There was no gray area here, no legal loophole they could exploit. The house was mine, fair and square, regardless of what my parents claimed about non-existent residency requirements in the will. I also knew that family matters could get complicated quickly, especially when emotions and manipulations ran high. I spent that night at my kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing every document related to the house, the deed, the will, property tax records, insurance policies, everything. I created a digital folder organizing all the documentation chronologically, building what would essentially be my case file if this went to court, which I was increasingly certain it would not. At midnight, I emailed Jackie, a colleague who specialized in estate law, explaining the situation and asking for her professional opinion. By 1 a.m., she had responded, confirming what I already knew. My parents had no legal ground to stand on. She also warned me that if they had physical access to the house and moved Stephanie in, it could create a messy situation that might require formal eviction proceedings to resolve. Don't let them get a foot in the door, she wrote literally. I nodded to myself, already formulating a plan. By 2 a.m., I had a full strategy mapped out, along with a minute-by-minute timeline for the next 48 hours. I would need to work quickly, decisively, and without tipping my hand to my family. The first thing Saturday morning, I called a locksmith who advertised emergency weekend services. I explained that I was the homeowner and needed all the locks changed immediately due to security concerns. I scheduled the appointment for 9 a.m. and offered to pay a premium for the urgent service. Next, I contacted a security company that a client had recommended to me after winning their housing case. They specialized in rapid deployment of home security systems, including cameras with remote monitoring capabilities. They could install a basic system by Saturday afternoon, with the option to upgrade later. I then called my friend Thomas, who was a police officer in the suburb where my grandmother's house was located. I explained the situation and asked if he could be present on Sunday evening when my family was likely to attempt to move Stephanie in. He agreed without hesitation, saying he would bring along a colleague and the relevant property documentation forms that would allow them to intervene if necessary. With the immediate security concerns addressed, I turned my attention to the legal side. I drafted a cease and desist letter to my parents and Stephanie, clearly stating my ownership of the property and my refusal to allow them to take possession. I also prepared an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order that I could file first thing Monday morning if necessary. By noon on Saturday, I was driving to my grandmother's house with determination coursing through my veins. I had packed several storage bins in my car to collect the most precious family heirlooms and irreplaceable items. While I had no intention of giving up the house, I wasn't going to risk my grandmother's photo albums, jewelry, or handwritten recipe books falling into the hands of people who clearly didn't respect her wishes. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw with relief that no one from my family was there yet. The house stood peaceful in the spring sunshine, the garden beginning to bloom just as it did every year. For a moment, grief washed over me again, not just for my grandmother, but for the family I thought I had. How could they do this? How could they try to take the one place where I had felt truly loved and safe? The locksmith arrived promptly at 9, and within an hour, every external door had a new lock. I had chosen a keypad entry system for the front door, which would allow me to grant or revoke access remotely and track who entered and when. The side and back doors received traditional deadbolts with keys that only I would possess. The security team arrived shortly after the locksmith left. They worked efficiently, installing cameras at all entry points and in the main living areas. The system would send alerts to my phone if any motion was detected, and I could view live feeds at any time from my phone or computer. They also installed new smoke and carbon monoxide detectors that were linked to the security system, a precaution that gave me peace of mind about the house's safety, even when I wasn't there. While the security team worked, I carefully packed up the items I couldn't bear to lose: my grandmother's wedding ring and the pearl necklace she wore for special occasions, the photo albums documenting 4 generations of our family, the hand-quilted blanket she had made when I was born, her collection of first-edition books that we used to read together, the wooden box containing all the letters I had written to her during college and law school. Each item I packed reminded me of her wisdom, her kindness, her unwavering belief in me. Never let anyone diminish your light, she used to tell me. Stand your ground when you know you're right. I could almost hear her voice encouraging me as I worked, validating my decision to fight for what was rightfully mine. By late afternoon, the security system was installed and operational. I had created accounts for the mobile apps that would allow me to monitor the property remotely, and I had tested all the features to ensure everything was working correctly. The technician walked me through the entire system one more time before leaving, making sure I was comfortable with every aspect of its operation. Just as I was preparing to leave, my phone rang. It was Stephanie. "Hey, I'm thinking of coming by tomorrow morning to start measuring for curtains and furniture placement. Would 9 work for you?" Her tone was casual, as if she were discussing something as innocuous as meeting for coffee, not taking possession of my house. "I'm actually not going to be there tomorrow," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "And I think we need to discuss this situation further before any plans are made." "What is there to discuss? Mom and Dad already told you what's happening. I need the house. You don't? It's simple." The entitlement in her voice was staggering. "Nothing about this is simple, Stephanie. The house is legally mine. Grandma left it to me for a reason. Only because you were her favorite." She snapped, the facade of sisterly concern cracking to reveal the resentment beneath. "You always got special treatment from her. And now you're going to deny my daughter a home out of spite. Real mature share." "This isn't about favoritism or spite," I said firmly. "It's about respecting Grandma's wishes and the legal reality of property ownership. You can't just take someone's house because you want it." "Watch me," she retorted, and hung up. I stood in the entryway of my grandmother's house, and took a deep breath. The conversation with Stephanie had only strengthened my resolve. This house represented more than just property to me. It was a symbol of the love and guidance my grandmother had given me, a physical manifestation of her belief in my strength and independence. I would not let it be taken from me through manipulation and bullying. As I locked up the house with the new keys, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I had tried to earn my parents' approval, had accepted their criticism and dismissal as somehow deserved. But this situation had clarified something for me. Their behavior wasn't my fault, and I didn't have to accept it anymore. The 48-hour deadline was still looming, but I was prepared. Let them come, I thought. Let them try. I had the law on my side, and for once in my life, I was going to stand up to my family without backing down. Saturday evening, my phone began buzzing with notifications. Stephanie had sent a series of texts with photos of furniture and decor ideas for her new house, as she called it. Each message felt like a deliberate provocation, an assumption that my silence meant consent to their plans. Thinking of painting the living room sage green. What do you think? Do you still have Grandma's dining table? Amanda and I won't need something that big, but maybe we could put it in storage, Mom said. You might want the china cabinet. Let me know if you do, otherwise we can sell it. The audacity was breathtaking. The dining table where I did my homework every afternoon while Grandma prepared dinner. The china cabinet that held her collection of depression glass that she had carefully explained the history of to me. They were discussing selling my grandmother's treasures as if they were already in possession of them. I didn't respond to any of Stephanie's messages. Engaging would only give the impression that this was a negotiation when in reality, there was nothing to negotiate. The house and everything in it belonged to me. Around 8 p.m., my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately. On the third attempt, I answered. Why aren't you responding to your sister's messages? She demanded without preamble. Hello to you too, Mom, I said, keeping my tone even. I don't have anything to say to Stephanie about the house. Don't be childish. Stephanie needs your help with planning the move. The least you could do is cooperate. There isn't going to be a move, Mom. The house is mine. I have no intention of giving it to Stephanie. There was a moment of silence, and then my mother scoffed. So you're going to fight us on this after everything we've done for you? The irony of her statement was almost laughable. What exactly had they done for me? My education that I paid for myself, my career that they dismissed as inconsequential, my achievements that were never quite good enough. I am not fighting anyone. I replied, I'm simply stating a fact. The house is mine legally and rightfully. Stephanie is in a difficult situation, but taking my house isn't the solution. Your house, she repeated with disdain. You act as if you built it brick by brick. That house has been in the family for generations. It should go to the person who needs it most right now. And that person is your sister. That's not how property ownership works, Mom. Grandma left the house to me in her will. That was her decision to make. And she made it because she didn't know Stephanie would end up divorced with a child to support. My mother nearly shouted. Circumstances change. Share. Family adapts. Why are you being so selfish? There it was again, the accusation of selfishness that had been leveraged against me whenever I didn't conform to their expectations. It had worked in the past, making me doubt myself, question my own needs and boundaries. But not this time. I'm not having this conversation anymore, I said firmly. The house is not available for Stephanie. She needs to find another solution. Your father wants to speak with you, my mother said. And before I could object, my father's voice came on the line. Cher, listen to me. He began in that authoritative tone used throughout my childhood. I've spoken with Martin, and Webb found precedent for contesting the will based on your grandmother's mental state in her final months. My heart pounded with anger. That's absolutely false, and you know it. Grandma was sharp as a tack until the end. Any doctor would confirm that, as would her regular bridge partners and the volunteers she worked with at the library. You're threatening to slander her memory to get your way. That's low even for you. I'm not threatening anything, he said coldly. I'm telling you what's going to happen if you continue to be unreasonable. Fighting this will be expensive, time-consuming, and embarrassing for everyone involved. Is that really what you want? To drag the family through a legal battle that will destroy relationships permanently? You seem to be confusing me with someone who is intimidated by legal proceedings, I replied, my lawyer instincts kicking in. I am not Dad. I know exactly what would happen if you tried to contest the will, and it wouldn't go the way you think. But you're right about one thing. This situation is destroying relationships, though not in the way you're implying. Sunday morning brought a new barrage of communications and email from my father with an attached document purporting to be a family agreement regarding the temporary reassignment of the house to Stephanie. The document was amateur at best, legally nonsensical at worst. Yet it was presented with the confidence of someone accustomed to having their declarations accepted without question. By midday, extended family members had somehow been drawn into the fray. My mother's sister called to tell me I should do the right thing for Stephanie and Amanda. My father's brother texted to say he was disappointed in my lack of family solidarity. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions on what should happen with my grandmother's house. It was as if my family had initiated a full-scale campaign to pressure me into submission. What they didn't realize was that each call, each text, each manipulative tactic only strengthened my resolve. These were the same dynamics that had made me feel small and powerless throughout my childhood. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was a competent adult who knew her rights and was prepared to defend them. At 3 p.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera feed on my phone and saw my parents and Stephanie standing on the porch of my apartment building. I buzzed them up mentally, preparing for the confrontation. When they entered my apartment, I could immediately sense their strategy. My mother wore an expression of wounded disappointment. My father carried a folder that no doubt contained more dubious legal documents. Stephanie had brought Amanda, using my 5-year-old niece as an emotional pawn. We wanted to talk in person, my mother began, as if this were a normal family visit. Clear the air before tomorrow. There is nothing to clear, I replied, not offering them seats. The house is not available for Stephanie. She needs to make other arrangements. Aunt Cher. Are we going to live in the house with the big tree swing? Amanda asked innocently, clearly coached to tug at my heartstrings. Before I could respond, Stephanie jumped in. Yes, sweetie. The house that great-grandma wanted us to have. The blatant lie made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. Amanda, honey, would you like to watch something on my tablet while the grown-ups talk? I handed her my tablet with a child-friendly app open, and she happily took it to the couch, effectively removing her from the manipulation attempt. That was unnecessary, Stephanie hissed. What is unnecessary is using a child as an emotional shield, I countered. This isn't going to work. None of it, Cher. The guilt trips, the threats, the family pressure campaign. The house is mine, legally and morally. I will not be bullied into giving it up. We are not bullying you, my father insisted, opening his folder. We are trying to reach a reasonable solution for a family crisis. Stephanie has nowhere to go. That simply isn't true, I replied. She has options. Apartments, smaller houses, temporary rentals. Boston has housing available in every price range. Do you hear yourself? My mother interjected, suggesting your sister and niece live in some cramped apartment when there's a perfectly good house sitting empty. A house that belongs to me, I emphasized. My home, my property, my decision. Your selfishness is unbelievable, Stephanie spat. You don't even use the house. You just keep it like some shrine because Grandma loved you best. Meanwhile, my daughter and I could actually make it a home. The way you make everything about you is truly remarkable, Stephanie, I replied, maintaining my calm. This isn't about who Grandma loved more. It's about respecting her wishes and the legal reality of property ownership. My father slid a document across my counter. This is a formal notice of our intent to challenge the will if you don't cooperate. Martin has already begun the paperwork. I glanced at the document, immediately recognizing it as essentially meaningless. It had no legal standing, no official letterhead, not even a proper signature from an attorney. It was a bluff designed to intimidate someone without legal knowledge. This isn't worth the paper it's printed on, I said, sliding it back. And if Martin is actually involved in this scheme, he should know better. Attempting to defraud me of my property could result in serious professional consequences for him. You're threatening our family attorney now, my mother asked incredulously. I'm stating facts. I corrected her, just as I'm stating the fact that the house is mine, will remain mine, and is not available for Stephanie to move into tomorrow or any other day. The tension in the room was palpable. My father, unaccustomed to having his authority questioned, turned an alarming shade of red. My mother looked as if she might burst into tears at any moment, a tactic she had employed successfully throughout my childhood. Stephanie glared at me with open hostility. This isn't over, my father finally said, gathering his worthless documents. Be prepared for what comes next. I'm always prepared, I replied evenly. Are you? After they left, taking a confused Amanda with them, I leaned against my closed door and took several deep breaths. The confrontation had been draining, but clarifying. There would be no peaceful resolution, no reasonable discussion. My family was committed to taking what was mine by any means necessary, including emotional manipulation and empty legal threats. The final 24 hours of their arbitrary deadline were ticking away, but I was ready. The house was secured, the legal documentation was in order, and I had backup in place. Tomorrow would bring the climax of this family drama, and for once, I wasn't going to be the one backing down. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my family. As I got ready for the day, I checked the security camera feeds on my phone. The house was quiet, undisturbed. I knew that wouldn't last. I had taken the day off from work, explaining to my supervisor that I was dealing with a family property dispute that required my immediate attention. As a lawyer who had never missed a day of work for personal reasons, my request was granted without question. By 9 a.m., I was parked down the street from my grandmother's house in a spot with a clear view of the driveway, but where my car wouldn't be immediately recognizable. I had a stack of legal documents on the passenger seat: the deed to the house, my grandmother's will, the letter from her attorney confirming my unconditional ownership, and the restraining order I had filed first thing that morning, which had been granted on an emergency basis due to the clear threat of illegal entry. Thomas, my police officer friend, had texted to confirm that he and his partner would be available starting at 10 a.m., which was when I expected my family to make their move. The security company had also assigned a representative to monitor the camera feeds remotely and alert me to any activity. At 9:30, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Motion detected at the front of the house. I opened the app to see my father walking around the perimeter, peering in windows, testing the door handles. Finding them locked, he made a phone call, gesturing animatedly. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language conveyed frustration and anger. 20 minutes later, a moving truck pulled up, followed by my mother's SUV with Stephanie in the passenger seat. My father approached them, and I could see them having a heated discussion, presumably about the locked doors. Stephanie got out of the car, marched up to the front door, and tried her key, looking confused when it didn't work. This was it. I texted Thomas to let him know it was time, then started my car and drove the short distance to the house, parking directly in the driveway behind the moving truck, effectively blocking it in. As I got out of my car, 3 faces turned to me in surprise. My mother recovered first, finally decided to show up and do the right thing, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm here to make sure the right thing happens," I replied calmly, as Thomas's patrol car pulled up to the curb. He and his partner, Officer Rivera, got out and approached our group. "What's going on here?" my father demanded. Drawing himself up to his full height, the authoritative businessman used to intimidating others. "Miss Warren asked us to be present while she addresses a potential trespassing situation," Thomas explained professionally, giving no indication that we were friends. "Trespassing?" Stephanie scoffed. "We're her family, are we not? This property belongs to Sheriff Warren," Officer Rivera stated, looking at the documentation I had provided earlier, "and she has not granted permission for anyone to enter." "This is ridiculous," my mother sputtered. "Sheriff, call off these officers immediately. This is a family matter." "A family matter involving an attempt to illegally take possession of my property?" I clarified, "which is why I've also filed for and received a temporary restraining order preventing any of you from entering the premises without my express written permission." I handed copies of the restraining order to each of them, watching as they scanned the legal document with increasing disbelief. "You got a restraining order against your own family?" Stephanie asked, her voice rising to a near shriek. "Have you lost your mind?" "On the contrary," I replied. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. This house belongs to me. Grandma left it to me in her will. You have no legal right to move in, regardless of what Mom and Dad have told you." My father, who had been reading the restraining order, carefully looked up with narrowed eyes. "This won't stand. I called Martin this morning, and he is preparing the paperwork to challenge the will." "Is he?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "That's interesting because I spoke with Martin myself an hour ago. Would you like to hear what he had to say?" I pressed play on the recording I had legally made of my conversation with our family attorney. "For the record, Mr. Harrison, I never advised the Warren family that there were grounds to contest Elaine Warren's will. The will is legally sound, and Sheriff Warren is the sole and rightful owner of the property at 42 Maple Street. I have not prepared, nor will I prepare, any documents challenging this fact. If Harold or Nancy Warren have claimed otherwise, they have misrepresented my professional opinion and services." The color drained from my father's face as the recording played. My mother looked from him to me in confusion, while Stephanie stood frozen, the reality of the situation finally beginning to sink in. "You lied," my mother asked my father, her voice small. "Martin never said we could challenge the will. He was being overly cautious," my father blustered, but the confidence was gone from his voice. "There are other attorneys who would take the case." "No reputable attorney would," I interjected. "The will is ironclad. Grandma was of sound mind. The document was properly executed, and there are no conditions or provisions that would allow for a transfer of ownership under these circumstances." "So what now?" Stephanie asked, tears forming in her eyes. "Amanda and I have nowhere to go. We gave up our apartment. Our stuff is in this truck." For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. My sister might be entitled and manipulative, but she was also a mother trying to provide for her child. Still, that didn't give her the right to take what was mine. "You have options, Stephanie," I said more gently. "There are short-term rentals available. I can provide you with a list, but this house is not one of those options." After everything we've done for you, my mother began falling back on her favorite refrain. "This is how you repay us. By humiliating us in front of the police, by leaving your sister and niece homeless." "They are not homeless because of me," I stated firmly. "They are homeless because you promised them something that wasn't yours to give. You created this situation, not me." My father, always pragmatic when backed into a corner, finally seemed to accept the reality of the situation. "Let's go," he said to my mother and Stephanie. "This isn't the time or place." "But all our stuff," Stephanie protested, gesturing to the moving truck. "Then find somewhere to put it," he replied tersely. "Come on." As they turned to leave, Officer Rivera spoke up. "For clarity, the restraining order prohibits you from entering the property without Miss Warren's written permission. Any attempt to do so would result in immediate legal consequences." "We understand," my father said stiffly, guiding my tearful sister toward my mother's SUV. As they drove away, the moving truck following behind after I moved my car, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that my plan had worked, sadness for the irreparable damage to my family relationships, anger at how far they had been willing to go. But mostly, I felt a sense of peace. I had stood my ground, protected what was rightfully mine, and broken free from the cycle of manipulation that had defined my family dynamics for too long. Thomas approached me as his partner returned to their patrol car. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm better than okay," I replied, looking up at my grandmother's house, my house standing solid and unchanged despite the storm that had just passed. For the first time in a long time, I think I'm exactly where I need to be. As I watched my family's vehicles disappear around the corner, I knew this wasn't truly the end. There would be fallout attempts at reconciliation or further manipulation depending on my parents' mood. But something fundamental had shifted. I had set a boundary and held it firm despite the pressure and emotional blackmail. Whatever came next, I would face it with the strength my grandmother had always seen in me. I turned and walked up the path to my front door, feeling the weight of my new house keys in my hand and the lightness of having finally stood up for myself. The days following the confrontation were a storm of emotional fallout. My phone buzzed constantly with messages ranging from rage to tearful pleas to cold accusations from various family members. My parents had apparently shared their version of events with the extended family, painting me as the villain who had left poor Stephanie and Amanda homeless out of spite and selfishness. Aunt Dorothy, my mother's sister, left a scathing voicemail. I never thought I'd see the day when a Warren would turn her back on family. Your grandmother would be ashamed. The irony that they were invoking my grandmother's name to pressure me into going against her explicit wishes was not lost on me. My cousin Jake, whom I had always been close with, texted to ask if I was okay and wanted to hear my side of the story. He was one of the few who bothered to ask. When I explained the situation, he responded with support. That sounds exactly like Uncle Harold and Aunt Nancy. Good for you for standing up to them. Stephanie alternated between angry accusations and desperate pleas. You've ruined everything one text would read, followed hours later by, please share. Just let us stay for a few months until I can save for a deposit on an apartment. I maintained my position, offering to help her find alternative housing and even to contribute to a security deposit, but the house itself was off the table. My father took a different approach, sending a formal email outlining a final offer where I would sign over the house to Stephanie in exchange for a sum of money that was less than half the property's market value. I didn't bother responding. The house wasn't for sale at any price. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Stephanie and Amanda had moved into my parents' guest house temporarily. The crisis of homelessness they had portrayed was apparently not as dire as they had made it seem. This revelation didn't surprise me, but it did reinforce my decision to stand firm. A week after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from Martin, our family attorney. He apologized for being caught in the middle of the dispute and attached several documents that shocked me to my core. In the interest of transparency and professional ethics, he wrote, I feel obligated to share these communications with you. Your parents consulted me about challenging your grandmother's will, not after Stephanie's divorce as they claimed, but 3 years ago, immediately after your grandmother's passing. I refused to participate then, as I have refused now, but I believe you should be aware of their long-standing intentions. The attached emails revealed a calculated plan that had been in motion for years. My parents had been looking for a way to recover the house from me since the moment my grandmother died. They had consulted multiple attorneys, all of whom had told them they had no case. The recent situation with Stephanie's divorce was merely a convenient pretext to execute a plan they had been developing all along. I sat at my kitchen table reading through the emails with a growing sense of betrayal. This wasn't an impulsive decision made out of concern for Stephanie's welfare. This was a deliberate long-term scheme to undermine my grandmother's wishes and take what she had explicitly left to me. One email from my father to a lawyer who had apparently declined to take the case was particularly revealing. The house has been in our family for generations. My mother's decision to leave it to share rather than allowing us to determine its best use within the family was short-sighted and emotionally driven. We need to correct this mistake. The arrogance and entitlement in those words crystallized something for me. This had never been about Stephanie's needs. It had been about control. My parents couldn't accept that my grandmother had made a decision they disagreed with. Couldn't tolerate that she had given me something of value without their approval or input. I forwarded the emails to Jackie, my estate attorney friend, asking for her professional assessment. Her response was blunt. This borders on conspiracy to commit fraud. If you wanted to, you could probably file ethics complaints against any attorney who participated in this scheme. At minimum, you now have documentation that would destroy any future attempt to contest the will. The revelation left me reeling, but also strangely liberated. For years, I had tried to earn my parents' approval, had doubted myself when they criticized me, had wondered if their clear preference for Stephanie was somehow my fault. Now I could see the dynamic for what it was: a pattern of control manipulation and conditional love that had nothing to do with my worth as a person. I decided to seek professional help to process these realizations. The therapist I found specialized in family trauma and helped me see the patterns that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. She introduced me to concepts like golden child and scapegoat narcissistic family systems, and emotional manipulation that put words to experiences I'd had but never fully understood. Your grandmother seems to have been the one healthy influence in your life, she observed during one session. She recognized your worth and wanted to protect you by giving you something that couldn't be taken away. By defending her gift, you're honoring not just her wishes, but also the healthy love she represented. Those words resonated deeply. My grandmother had been different from my parents in every way that mattered. Where they were critical, she was supportive. Where they withheld approval, she gave love freely. Where they saw me as a reflection of themselves, she saw me as an individual with my own path to follow. As weeks passed, the barrage of communications from my family gradually slowed. My mother attempted a different strategy, calling to casually invite me to Sunday dinner as if nothing had happened. We've all been under stress, she said. Let's put this unpleasantness behind us and move forward as a family. I declined the invitation. I'm not ready for that, I told her. Honestly, what happened wasn't a simple misunderstanding or a moment of stress. It was a calculated attempt to take something that rightfully belongs to me, and I need time to process that betrayal. You've always been so dramatic, she sighed, falling back on a familiar dismissal of my feelings. Family disagreements happen. You need to learn to forgive and forget. This wasn't a disagreement, Mom. It was an organized campaign to defraud me of my property, complete with lies, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. That's not something I can just forget over Sunday pot roast. The conversation ended poorly, but I felt stronger for having maintained my boundary. In the past, I would have capitulated, would have agreed to move on without resolution, would have accepted their version of reality over my own experience. Not anymore. Meanwhile, I began spending more time at my grandmother's house, my house. I cleared out the guest room I'd used as a teenager and began staying there several nights a week. The commute to my office was longer, but the peace I felt within those walls was worth the extra travel time. I tended the garden as my grandmother had taught me, watching with satisfaction as the perennials she had planted years ago pushed through the soil in their eternal cycle of renewal. I cooked in her kitchen, slept under quilts she had made, and felt her presence in the home she had created and entrusted to me. Sometimes I would sit on the porch swing and try to imagine what she would say about the situation. I could almost hear her voice. You stood your ground, Cher. You honored yourself, and you honored me. That's all I ever wanted for you. In those moments, despite the family rupture and the painful revelations, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The house was more than just property. It was a sanctuary where I could finally be true to myself, free from the distorted mirrors my family had always held up to me. The journey wasn't over. There would be more confrontations, more attempts at manipulation, more painful realizations about my family dynamics. But for the first time, I felt equipped to face them on my own terms, grounded in the truth of who I was and what I deserved. As spring turned to summer, I watched my grandmother's garden bloom in vibrant colors. Life continues, I thought, even after storms try to uproot it. Just like the perennials she loved, I too was finding my way back to the light. 6 months passed, seasons changed, and with them, my life transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. The Victorian house that had been the center of so much conflict was now truly my home. After much consideration, I had decided to sell my downtown apartment and move permanently into my grandmother's house. The lengthy commute was a small price to pay for waking up each morning, surrounded by memories of the woman who had shown me what unconditional love felt like. The first weeks after the confrontation had been the hardest. The silence from my family was deafening, punctuated only by occasional messages attempting to either guilt me or minimize what had happened. Can't we put this behind us? You're tearing the family apart over bricks and mortar. Each message reinforced my decision to maintain distance. Initially, the solitude was painful. Despite the dysfunction, they were still my family, and their absence left a void that echoed through the rooms of the house. There were moments when I questioned my decision, wondering if I had been too harsh, too unbending. In those moments of doubt, I would read my grandmother's letter again, reminding myself of her wisdom and her faith in me. This house has sheltered 4 generations of strong women. Now it will shelter you, my dear Cher, as you continue to forge your own path. Slowly, I began to heal. The therapy sessions continued, helping me untangle the complex web of family dynamics that had shaped me. I learned to recognize the patterns of manipulation and gaslighting that had made me doubt my own perceptions for so many years. I began to understand that the problem had never been me, my achievements, my choices, my personality, but rather my parents' inability to see me as separate from their own expectations and desires. As I worked through these realizations, I channeled my energy into reclaiming the house as my own. I painted the sunroom a warm yellow that brightened even the gloomiest winter mornings. I refinished the hardwood floors that had been hidden under carpets for decades. I updated the kitchen while carefully preserving the vintage elements my grandmother had loved. Each change was a deliberate choice, an affirmation that this space was mine to shape according to my own vision. The garden became my sanctuary, just as it had been for my grandmother. Following her meticulously kept garden journal, I planted the same varieties she'd loved, adding a few of my own choices alongside them. There was something profoundly healing about working the soil, watching seeds transform into blooms, witnessing the cycles of growth and rest that mirrored my own journey. Gradually, I began to build a community around me. The neighbors who had known my grandmother welcomed me with casseroles and garden advice. I invited colleagues from work for dinner parties in the dining room where I had once done my homework. I joined the local historical society that my grandmother had been active in, helping to preserve the stories and buildings that made our neighborhood special. And most significantly, I started a small scholarship fund in my grandmother's name for law students who, like me, came from difficult family backgrounds. The Elaine Warren Resilience Scholarship wouldn't change the world, but it might change one student's life, giving them the support and belief that my grandmother had given me. 3 months after the confrontation, I received a letter from Stephanie. Unlike the demanding texts and emotional outbursts that had characterized our earlier communications, this letter was reflective, almost humble. "I owe you an apology," she wrote. "I was so caught up in my own problems that I never stopped to consider what the house meant to you or that what mom and dad were asking me to participate in was wrong. Since everything happened, I've been doing a lot of thinking about our family and the way we've always treated you. It wasn't fair, and I'm sorry for my part in it." She went on to explain that she had found an apartment she could afford, that she and Amanda were settling in well, and that she was working with a therapist of her own to understand the family pattern she had perpetuated. "I am not asking for forgiveness," she concluded. "Just letting you know that your standing up for yourself made me look at things differently." I read the letter several times, letting the words sink in. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was a start, a small acknowledgement of truths that had been denied for too long. I wrote back thanking her for the apology and wishing her well in her new home. We weren't ready to rebuild our relationship, but perhaps someday we could create something new, something healthier than what had come before. My parents were a different story. My father had made one final attempt at intimidation, sending a certified letter threatening legal action if I didn't return the house to the family. My response, drafted with Jackie's help, had been brief and devastating, including copies of the emails Martin had provided proving their long-standing intentions to defraud me. There had been no further communications from him. My mother occasionally sent cards on holidays or my birthday, never acknowledging the conflict, acting as if we were simply busy people who hadn't found time to connect. I returned the gifts she sent, but kept the cards in a box, unable to throw them away, but equally unable to pretend that her casual denial of reality was acceptable. The hardest lesson had been accepting that family doesn't always mean unconditional love or support. Sometimes family relationships are the most conditional of all, requiring conformity and compliance in exchange for belonging. Recognizing this truth had been painful, but ultimately liberating. I could stop trying to earn approval that would never be freely given. Stop contorting myself to fit expectations that were never designed for my happiness. Instead, I focused on building connections based on mutual respect and genuine care. The friends who had supported me through the crisis, the colleagues who had covered my caseload during my absence, the neighbors who had welcomed me with open arms. These were the people who formed my chosen family, now bound not by blood, but by choice and shared values. 6 months to the day after the confrontation, I hosted a garden party. The peonies were in full bloom. The weather was perfect, and the house looked more beautiful than ever. As I watched my guests enjoying the space, laughing and talking among the flowers my grandmother had planted, I felt her presence strongly, as if she were there nodding in approval. Later, as twilight fell and the last guest departed, I sat alone on the porch swing, listening to the familiar creaks of the old house settling for the night. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. Grief for the family relationships I had lost, or perhaps never truly had, would always be part of me. But alongside it was a profound sense of peace of having honored both my grandmother's legacy and my own worth. The house stood solid around me, sheltering me just as it had sheltered generations of women before me. In protecting it, I had learned to protect myself as well, to establish boundaries that preserved my dignity and peace of mind. In fighting for what was rightfully mine, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. My grandmother taught me to stand tall in the face of injustice, and in honoring her home, I finally learned to honor myself. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of setting boundaries and finding strength, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear this message. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say no to those who don't respect your boundaries. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to protect what matters most to you.